Okay, so we are going to be talking today about activism and the autonomic nervous system. We're big fans of the autonomic nervous system. I think it comes up in nearly every conversation we have, at least as related to our work in the world. And we have an upcoming program, starting an online program that starts in a couple of weeks here, about 3 weeks, is that right?
July 9th.
July 9th. And it's called Erotic Embodiment and the Triune Autonomic Nervous System. And what we're talking about today is actually really related to erotic embodiment. Activism and erotic embodiment are so intertwined for us because our erotic embodiment, our wellness there is really dependent upon our belonging to these larger groups, whether it's the humans in the world and also just the world, the planets, the animals, everything as a whole. All of that is intertwined, and you can't separate out our individual wellness from the wellness of the world, and certainly not from the wellness of our human community. And so these things are really related. What we're teaching in this program, and I'll put the link in here in the comments, but what we're teaching about, or what the two of you are going to be teaching about, is so much more than about our sex, our pleasure, our orgasms. It includes that. And it's also about these larger, more complex, really just human issues.
Yeah, maybe even to speak to this term we use, erotic intelligence, which can be so immediately thought to have only to do with the intelligence of our partnering or the intelligence of our physical intimacy, our sexual intimacy. And for us, and for so many people, for much of the ecological world, it has far more to do with the measure of our capacity, our erotic intelligence, the measure of our capacity to engage with the world around us, with ourselves and the world around us, human and other than human, as Alyssa's describing, in ways that grow diverse, resilient expression, in ways that support generative, diverse life forms, that the measure of our capacity to engage in ways that support each other's wellness. So not actually supporting or preferencing our own wellness at all. And so erotic embodiment and erotic intelligence are in some ways very similar. You don't necessarily make a distinction. An erotically embodied being is an erotically intelligent being as well. It engages with self, and it engages with the world around it in ways that value and preference and support the diversity of life's expressions within and around it. And
as humans, I just wanted to add, as humans, in order to have that erotic embodiment and erotic intelligence intact, we need to also be in connection with our nervous system and the levels of our nervous system and the wellness in our nervous system. And that's why we tie these two things together, because when we're flexible and when we're adaptable, we can be more of a contributor to the generativity and the creation that is really ours to participate in the world that we live in, and the people, the other people, and the world. And so how that ties into activism is we also need to be flexible and adaptable and coherent and strong in order to confront the material that we're confronting these days around social justice. And maybe you're someone for the first time who is having difficult conversations with friends and family, or maybe you're someone who's on the front line protesting or talking to lawmakers. And wherever you're at, it's really important to recognize and be in contact with the resource of your nervous system so that you can take in information, that you can influence change while you're tending to the larger So it's the ability to stay with self while also keeping an eye out into the larger purpose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so the staying embodied there, one of the pieces that feels so important. I know we're great, as just like we're fans of the triune autonomic nervous system. I love the idea of being fans of the triune autonomic. It's like being fans of the brain or the heart. But we're also we're fans of the thing called the learning zone, which we've written a little bit about recently, and that's another thing that we'll probably be talking about today, is this different for everyone's sweet spot, which doesn't, in fact, mostly doesn't feel comfortable, but that is that neurological place that is the exact window within which each of us is on the edge of our comfort and safety and familiarity enough to be paying attention, to have our nervous system be paying attention, while also familiar enough and embodied enough and present enough to be able to absorb what's happening around us and within us. And that has so much to do with that piece you were talking about, Muse, the capacity to stay aware of what it is that has us on the front lines, whatever those front lines look like, and staying effective, staying present enough to be really fully effective. But it's not an easy task, and it doesn't get modeled for us very often, certainly not in the human world. And when we think of activism and we think of protests, even peaceful protests, oftentimes we have this idea that it's this sort of thing, and it's a fighting against versus a working toward or working for. And those are very different things to the triune autonomic nervous system. Fighting against is most likely a sympathetic or parasympathetic, but sympathetic usually, branch activation, and working towards and working for, staying in touch with that passion that you were describing, Muse. That's a social engagement branch activation. And that's the social engagement branch determining what other aspects of the triune autonomic nervous system will be employed in order to make more pop.
Oh no.
That went out.
Okay.
Well, while she's on pause there, she'll likely come back. The difference between being in the learning zone and being out of the learning zone is being in the zone of fight, flight, and freeze. And so those are terms that we hear all of the time. I'm in fight, flight, freeze. And we don't actually hear a lot about the learning zone and that spot where we're challenged enough to keep moving towards. And so I just wanted to give that reference point to people, that it's when we're not in the learning zone, but we are in activation or dissociation, that's where we spill over into fight, flight, freeze, which is a really easy place to go into if we're being tear gassed or getting arrested or blocking traffic or talking to our parents. These things can can spill us over. So if we can recognize when we're about to tip over, we can do things that help to keep us in our learning zone, or recognize when we're out, so that we can maybe take a step back or make a different choice and get ourselves back into that regulation point.
So good.
Yeah, it just feels really just like a little bit of information, because maybe this is obvious and known, I don't know, but when we're in some kind of fight, flight, or freeze, one thing that happens is the blood stops flowing to the front part of our brains, which is sort of where our higher functioning happens. All of our capacity to think and be noticing things and be, looking at complex systems and making informed decisions really happens with this part of our brain. And when we're in fight, flight, or freeze, the blood stops flowing to this part of our brain because we're dealing with a threat. And so when you're in that place, it's you're not fully online. And so, Christiane, what you were saying is fighting against versus fighting for something, a lot of that I think has to do with what's actually going on physiologically when we are engaging somewhere. It's more complex than that. And there's one more thing I wanted to say, which I'm going to forget what it was, that it's gone.
I imagine it will come back.
Yeah. That I remembered it now, that I feel like I want us to be really careful about how we're talking about the learning zone and wellness and erotic embodiment and all of these things, because it's not so much like the sign of wellness is not that you can stay in your learning zone all the time. It's not that you don't get activated, or we could say triggered into a nervous system response. It's that you're able to recognize when it's happening and come back into your learning zone, or, you know, resource yourself to eventually be able to get back there.
Yeah, the resilience piece is like for folks who are doing a lot, the vagal fitness is so big these days. And vagal fitness, whatever it is you're up to, whether you're taking cold showers or you're practicing breathing or whatever your particular version of that is, that's really the entire purpose of that, is to increase our body's capacity to have a physiological response to intensity and then come back to resting. And have a physiological response to intensity, so increased heart rate, increased respiration, and then come back to resting with the least amount of obstacle, with the quickest efficiency. And that's what you're describing, Alyssa. That's what I hear you describing when you're talking about it's not that we don't get out of our learning zone, it's that we learn. Wellness is a measure of our capacity to recognize when we've slipped outside of our embodiment, and we're in a reaction, and being able to course correct so that we come back in, and that process itself is very efficient.
And I think, can I just say one quick thing, Mies? I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but I want to
just play one on television.
Right. But I've been told that you can actually train, and maybe we can talk about different ways to do this, so that when you do get triggered into some kind of fight or flight response, so you can actually train yourself through different things that you're speaking to with vagal fitness, so that your brain is offline for shorter and shorter periods of time. So you can be in some kind of reaction, but your brain actually is still there.
Stays present, right. It stays present and observing of the reaction. And that's where the mind comes in, and that's where the social engagement branch comes in. The social engagement branch can disconnect the stories the mind makes up about physiological states, so that we can have the physiological states without the story. It's one of the reasons MDMA assisted therapy is so effective, is that it disengages that connection that is so autonomic for so many of us between the brain's experience and the mind. And so I think that's what you're talking about, Alyssa, just to put more distance between things that gives us more time to really determine or choose how we want to be in any given moment. Yeah.
Which I just want to say is a distinction from, oh, I'm feeling this, and then just turning the other way from it, or trying to divert attention or not feel that. It's really different. It's allowing that physiological response to happen, maybe shortening the time of it coming back to balance or homeostasis, but not at the expense of actually feeling it, actually dealing with it, and then also combined with kind of driving a wedge between the physiological experience and what we make it mean in our brains, the opinions and responses that we have in that way.
Great. So can we ground this a little
bit
in both activism itself and how we're relating that there, but also just with some really tangible, I don't know if it's examples or things that people can do or have an eye on in themselves? with all of this.
Let's do that. You know, as you were describing earlier, Alyssa, what happens for us when we slip from a response situation, but from being responsive to being reactive. So when we slip into a parasympathetic or a sympathetic level activation in our nervous system.
Meaning fight, flight, or freeze. Just
fight, flight, or freeze. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Let's give some examples even of what that might look like, because I think we think it looks either like an overt desire to pick a fight, or to run away, or to, you know, play dead, to freeze in our tracks. And it looks like so many more things than that. It's so much more nuanced. And if we're given permission and armed with some of the things that it can look like, in addition to those really overt responses, reactions, we might be able to catch it sooner, especially if we're doing things like attending protests and, you know, having really intense conversations about heated topics that we all, no matter what we feel passionate about. And we can even do that from our own personal experience. How do we know when we're sliding into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic?
For me, freeze is like my nervous system's go-to reaction. Most of the time. It's changing a little bit, but what that most often looks like is not like, I don't actually freeze. The sort of early warning systems are this just fog and confusion that will creep in, especially in relationally or in conversations about all kinds of things. Even when I'm leading and facilitating groups, there will be just this like, what's happening? Why? And I'll start to feel sort of almost sick to my stomach. Just this whole barrage of things will happen that I now know is actually a freeze response. That's one.
Mine's a little hot. Surprising. My pits get sweaty. My heart, like it becomes this like a larger beat. Like I can feel it pumping against the front of my chest, but almost in this delayed way, like it skips. And then even if my mind is blank, I feel like I have to say something. I have to put something in, and maybe there's a fear of just completely getting obliterated or lost if I don't move in.
So interesting to watch you. Like it feels so clearly like some version of a fight response, just the way you're moving your body and you're sort of leaning forward, where I'm like, I just get kind of foggy and whatever, like gone. And you're like,
Yeah.
Well, and those, so let's just qualify those, because it can be really helpful. I imagine anyone watching this will now already have an experience of, oh, that one's me. I'm more like Alyssa. Oh, no, I'm definitely more like Muse. And so one of the things that we want to say is that it's likely that in order that one of the go-to experiences at one point for Alyssa was a push and a pull and a grasp and something that's more sympathetic, that's a little bit more like this, but it didn't work in her world. There wasn't anyone there to respond to her and really validate her sympathetic nervous system response. So when push comes to shove for Alyssa, she goes right into the parasympathetic, and the parasympathetic is withdrawing, just bringing blood supply and blood flow to the most minimal, the most prehistoric places of survival. And you might just feel like that, like, I don't have any capacity to do anything in this place. I can just be here, and I can't even defend myself. I'm just not. It's really important to give these states of body, embodied states, characteristics, because they feel like such a certain way. And Muse, you probably feel tingly and energized, but not in a way that has you thinking with your executive functioning. You're just all body and all in there and all engagement. And
Or like a snap, even a breath,
Yeah, a snap. Yes. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. And
Like
if I
a
can trace
snapping
that
turtle.
back, it's if I wasn't as a young person met with curiosity, right, with a disagreement or a different idea about something, I was kind of met with a fire, and so I had to meet it with fire, or else I would disappear.
You would have. Yep.
But
Absolutely.
meeting it with fire actually worked in my household.
Yeah.
So I learned it that way.
Yeah. And we tend to think of the most popular thought is that these branches of the nervous system, they evolved sequentially, and so the very first creatures had this parasympathetic nervous system that Alyssa's describing, where really just as the most reliant on the benevolence of the environment around it to have food wash by it, so it could just take the food in. It couldn't go get the food. It couldn't move away from threat. And then along came, millions of years later, the capacity to actually pursue, and a much more evolved circulation system and large muscles that could respond to more blood and could move a creature in a certain direction, move it towards prey, move it towards mating, move it towards whatever, move it away, could defend itself. And so if we push Muse enough, if just all that fighting doesn't work, chances are Muse is eventually going to get to this place where she just freezes and she shuts down. And we know that by the time that happens, she's way out of her learning zone. And now she's just surviving. It's just about survival. And those are really hard places. Poor decisions get made. Immediate decisions get made that don't have the benefit or the benevolence of anyone other than just, the one consideration of the one person or the one organism in mind. And we're seeing a lot of that right now. We're seeing a lot of sympathetic and parasympathetic activation in our world. And so to be able to recognize how it is that we move ourselves back into that embodied place.
No, this keeps happening, like right when she's about to make the great point. All right. Well, I think, if we tie this into some of what's been happening in different protests, there's been, because our nervous systems they're not self-contained. They're responding to our environment, both the threats that are coming in and also the resource that is in the environment. And there's been these beautiful things happening at different protests around the country. I can't remember where. Oh, we lost her completely. I can't remember where some of these examples have been, but of, things starting to get maybe more violent or rowdy. And rowdy feels like such a, I don't like that word actually. So I'll just say getting more violent, and then the group actually resourcing from itself, certain people sort of coming in to help regulate the group, and not in like a regulate like from a top down sort of way, but more from the bottom up, saying like, hey, like hang on a second, here's what we're actually doing. And it feels like there's just so much resource in the group within protests and in other situations as well that can really be supportive to the people who are there. And also just being together in that group and seeing other people who are taking a stand for the thing that you are taking a stand for that really matters to you can be incredibly resourcing for our nervous system, so that you can stay in the learning zone, you can stay resourced and not get kicked into a fight or flight or a freeze response.
Yeah, just really having us remembering why we're here or what we're doing, what the point or the mission is, what the goal is. For me, one of the things that can put me back, if I am fortunate enough to be with someone who is caring and curious, when I get into this fight, like soothing touch, or, hey, I'm noticing I don't feel like you're on my team right now. That's my partner says that so kindly all the time, which has me just realize, oh, right, I'm completely off of what I'm going for here, being relational, being intimate. And so self-touch can also really help me. I'm kinetic or kinesthetic like that. And so this idea of co-regulation can be really helpful when we fall out of our learning zone. And we don't always have someone there with us or people with us, but that can be one helpful way to come back.
So we have just a few minutes left. Wondering where we want to land, how we want to land.
I feel like it's so important to remember this for all of us, no matter what our version of activism looks like. It's so, when things get so bad, and things are so bad right now, and they're not even as bad as they're gonna get, things really have to fall apart. It's not like we can patch.
Can I qualify something there? Because when you say so bad, can you say more of what you mean? Because that could be so many different ways.
Yeah, we've gotten ourselves in quite a situation with the environment. Our social justice is non-existent. It's not a matter of just passing a few laws. Systems have to get reworked from the ground up.
So what you're saying is not that what's happening, the activism that's happening, the protests that happening aren't so bad.
No, that expression is a necessary. Thanks for qualifying. No, it's a wonderful thing what's happening. And it's easy to forget when things are so heated and things are so elevated and everything means so much, and it necessarily has to mean so much. It's easy to forget what we're doing when we're standing with a sign, or we're making sure to vote, and we're doing our voting research, and maybe we're waiting in line for 3 hours to vote or 5 hours to vote, and we're risking becoming ill. To remember what it is we're doing, and we're not just doing all of this so that we don't have police brutality. We're doing this so that we have a culture and human systems and an ecological system that is well. And so much of this nervous system embodiment that you're talking about and resilience comes from remembering the entire picture, that we're fighting for things and we're working towards things. And the more, even in really heated protests, the more we remember that there's this right in front of us, and there is beauty right in front of us. There's injustice right in front of us, and there is beauty right in front of us. And just that calisthenic of, what am I enraged about? What do I love? What brings me joy? What makes me weep with delight? What makes me scream with rage? That is a resilient and well nervous system. And we stay embodied when we really ask ourselves to remember, what are we fighting for? What does it look like? What does it feel like? That's a very important thing to remember.
Beautiful. So I think all of this, what we're speaking to, is going to be broken down in really specific, granular, experiential ways in this upcoming course that the two of you are going to be a part of. And so that
yeah, specific to the participants, because as we said, it's different for each person. Each human being has a different nervous system.
And we'll be just exploring together. We'll be exploring online. It's an 8-week exploration, and we'll be teasing all of this out and having our own experiences, getting to know ourselves. As this nervous system is just below the level of our consciousness, and so these reactions that we're talking about happen before our brains even know that they're happening. We realize that we're there. So slowing down so that we can start to know ourselves in this underneath way a little bit better, or articulate it. We actually know ourselves here already, but a lot of times we don't really know how to articulate ourselves through it, or really feel ourselves with our cognitive function intact, as well as our felt sense our nervous system responses. And so it really is to start to bridge those things together.
And using the community, using each other, because we are such social creatures, and we have this layer of our nervous system, the social engagement branch, that's really entirely designed to be well in community, and it gets fed by community, it gets grounded in community. Its attributes are for engagement with each other. So we will be teaching each other and ourselves how to really optimally use that social engagement branch.
Yeah. So then taking that into deeper, more well relationships with ourselves and our people.
Yeah. It couldn't have, it's not, who knew? We didn't have a crystal ball when we decided we would teach this course, and it couldn't be at a better time.
Great. So you can learn more on the website, which there's a link in the comments to that. And if you have questions, our contact info is there as well. So you can reach out, or you can send direct messages to any of us, and we will be in touch. Thank you for joining us or watching the recording if you're watching that, and hope you have a good rest of your day. Bye for now.
Bye.